From plane of light to plane, wings dipping through geometries and orchids that the sunset builds, out of the peak's black angularity of shadow, riding the last tumultuous avalanche of light above pines and the guttural gorge, the hawk comes.
His wing skies down another day. His motion is that of the honed steel edge. We hear the crashless fall of stalks of time. The head of each stalk is heavy with the gold of our error.
Look, look, he is climbing at last light. Who knows neither time nor error, and under whose eye, unforgiving, the world unforgiven, swings into shadow.
Long now, the last thrush is still, the last bat now cruises in his sharp hieroglyphics. His wisdom is ancient too and immense. The star is steady like the Plato over the mountain.
If there were no wind, we might, we think, hear the earth grind on its axis, or history drip in darkness like a leaking pipe in the cellar.
Alright, so we are annotating Evening Hawk by Robert Penn Warren. So it begins with from plane of light to plane, wings dipping through. So this is an interesting way to begin because he starts talking about a plane, but in our day and age we don't really associate light on a plane. We think of airplanes, so it definitely throws the reader for a loop in the very beginning and kind of makes them interested in what they're reading. And then it says, geometries and orchids that the sunset builds out of the peak's black angularity of shadow. So, writing. But, so geometries and angularity are pretty similar ideas, or at least in the same realm, and it kind of reinforces the other one. However, sunset, black, and shadow are contrasting each other. And so it's interesting that he puts them right next to each other because it's comparing and contrasting really close in two lines. And then it says, comma, writing, and this is an interesting choice because he could have ended the thought or line with just shadow, but he makes a purposeful effort to add another word and add some punctuation, and this is called enjambment. And then it continues on to the last tumultuous avalanche of light above pines in the guttural gorge, the hawk comes. So peaks and avalanche are pretty different because if you think about an avalanche, it falls down the mountain, whereas it's contrasted with peaks in the line just above it. But we believe that the avalanche of light, as you'll see later on, this is a metaphor. The whole poem is kind of talking about death. And so the avalanche of light, we believe, is the last hurrah, the very end when you look back and you're enlightened by everything that you learned in life, and this is the time to be alive. And it's a good metaphor for that. And then guttural gorge is an alliteration, and it just kind of makes the poem sound kind of cool. But it continues on to the hawk comes, and we are finally introduced to our subject.
Okay, so this one starts with a transition from just now finding out who the hawk is to the next stanza you're finding out what the hawk does. So it begins with, his wings skies down another day. So skies down another day creates imagery. Skies is what the Grim Reaper holds. It's the arrow hook thing that he holds. So then it goes, his motion is that of a honed steel edge, which honed steel I find very precise, very sharply cut. And then it goes, we hear the crashes, or the crashless fall of the stalks of time. So we as the audience is identified. We, just people in general, the entire world, we, the people reading the poem, hear the crashless fall of the stalks of time. So a crashless fall is something falling but you can't hear it. So does it really, is it really having an effect on anyone if you can't hear it? So it's kind of ironic and doesn't have any purpose behind the crashless fall because you can't really hear what they're saying, hear what's going on. And then it says of the stalks of time. which can be seen as a metaphor for life in general. And then the next stanza is a transition where you're realizing that it's you that the cross just falls about and that you're being the one sliced down. So the head of each stalk is heavy with the gold of our error. So the gold of our error is kind of like lessons that we've learned. So every stalk of time that he's cutting down is just full of everything that we've learned in our lives and all the lessons we've done. And so then the next stanza shift is between this one and where it begins with look, look, which is a sense of urgency, and you can see that in the exclamations points and the repetition. And you're realizing that he's pressing, and he, being the hawk, is coming. So he is climbing the last light, who knows neither time nor error, and under whose eye unforgiving the world unforgiven swings into shadow. So and under, swings, and shadow are all, just and under and swings are enjambment. Which is like the author not finishing a sentence in the line for a purpose. And then also the unforgiving. So the hawk's eye is very unforgiving, and the world is unforgiven by the hawk. So the hawk is unforgiving to those of the world because of all that the world had put him through. So swings into shadow. So we come back with the shadow and the darkness and just how ominous the hawk's job is. So yeah.
So this is the last section when you're looking at it, although it's 2 stanzas. And it begins with, long now, the last thrush is still, the last bat now cruises in a sharp hieroglyphics. So this is the hawk's wings, and he's batting his wings for the last time this night, if you will. And this is the batting of his wings is him like killing people. And so it brings around to hieroglyphics, which kind of indicate how long he's been alive, how routine this has become, because it's kind of like his own language, if you will. And he knows all these movements all too well. And it continues on with, his wisdom is ancient too and immense. The star is steady like Plato over the mountain. So here we have his wisdom and the star are enjambments again, which is purposeful. The author purposefully continued the sentence or the line even though the thought was completed. And in here he throws in a lot of sentences, which is different for him because he tends to kind of speak in like run-on commas. So this is he's changing things up here, kind of to show that everything's become routine and very very nonchalant. The hawk is just killing people and people and people throughout history. The ending, like Plato, so this simile in him being steady shows that the hawk is ever present and he's seen a lot. He's been through history. He was there when Plato was killed, and he has been there. He's acquired a lot of wisdom. And so then this last shift between the stanzas kind of shows you what it would be like if he wasn't there and why he's important, even though people don't like death, even though it's not something that people are very fond of usually. He has a purpose, and he's there to make people reflect and make sure that they're living every day to their fullest and they're paying attention to history being made. Because if the imminent thought of death is not ever present, then you would just kind of stay in the same old and nothing would ever get done. And this is seen in the last stanza with, if there were no wind, we think, hear the earth grind on its axis, or history drip in the darkness like a leaking pipe in the cellar. So here we see we is referring to the audience again as everybody in the world, everybody who's reading this poem. We see here and the or history enjambment again, and then the very end, like a leaking pipe in the cellar, which is a metaphor, simile. And this just kind of shows how boring history would be. Nobody would pay attention to it because no one would have the fear of leaving this world.
So that's the end. Okay, so now we're going to go over soapstone for the poem. So the subject is a third-person omniscient speaker. So the speaker just seems to have observed or paid attention to the hawk and the metaphor of death over time. So they're just kind of watching over. And the occasion is for people like learning to understand death, because it can be a lot to understand for many people, and it's just hard to comprehend why or how it happens. So that's the occasion, is learning to understand it. The audience is kind of the whole world. Like, everyone has doubts and questions about what death is and what it means. So it's just kind of a something for the whole world to see. The purpose, I think, behind it is to live each day to the fullest, because it talks about how the hawk does what the hawk wants, and you never know which day is going to be your last, and that every day you learn lessons and you need to put them to use. And then the subject is life and death through death's eyes. So you're seeing like how the hawk thinks of death and how it's become a routine for him. And so the tone, we got pensive, which is like a thoughtful tone, and it makes you think about what they're saying. And so a couple of words for that we found that for was when it said stalks of time, heavy with the gold of our error, and the star is steady. And we also got an omniscient tone, which is kind of a spooky, like freaky tone, kind of scary and dark. So for that we got sice down, crashless fall, whose eye unforgiving, the world unforgiven, and drip in darkness like a leaking pipe in the cellar. So yeah, that's it.